The topic of the plenary is the faith traditions as a resource for combating anti-Semitism and hate, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian leadership on tolerance as a spiritual imperative. It's my pleasure to invite Rabbi Michael Melchior, to lead this discussion. Rabbi Melchior is an incredible friend of the Global Forum. He is a leader of the Global Forum in the past, and he is eminently appropriate to lead this discussion. In addition to being the chief rabbi of Norway, the deputy foreign minister, a minister in the Israeli government for world Jewry and social affairs, founder of a political party in Israel, and head of the committee which deals with all issues of diaspora and the success of Jewry. He is a person who's outstandingly committed to the idea of religion as a bridge, of spirituality as something which unites humankind. And he has done it in so many vast ways that are better known, that are less known, but is the exact right person to lead this conversation. Rabbi Melchior, Fakasha.
Thank you very much, Akiva, and I want to congratulate you for this global forum, which you have led from A to Z, and I think you've done a great, great job. I would like to welcome my co-panelists here this morning. We have a very exciting panel and very distinguished and interesting people who I know that you will very much enjoy to listen to. First of all, I want to call upon the new nuncio, Archbishop Leopoldo Girelli, who is very new to his position, and he's so new to his position that he just got here to Jerusalem and just got permission yesterday from the Holy See to participate with us this morning, and we're very grateful that you're with us. Thank you and welcome. Please come up here and join us. And I want to welcome Rabbi Irving, amongst friends called Greenberg, who I think that most people in the crowd know well, because he has been in this field for so many years, a pioneer of so many issues which are related to the theme of what we're talking about this morning, of the ethics of religion, of relations between religions, especially Jewish-Christian relations, religious and cultural pluralism, and the theology evolving after the Shoah, and importance, both historical and religious importance of the State of Israel. And we are honored to have you, Rabbi Itz, on our panel here this morning. Then I'm very pleased to present to you Imam Yahya Pallavicini from Italy, who is an Imam who is known to this forum very well. He, and before him, his late father, blessed be his memory, is the Imam of the Al-Wahid Mosque in Milan, where he organizes the training of Imams of Italy. He's also the head of the vice president of the Italian Islamic religious community, and he is involved in many interreligious initiatives. Now recently the initiative joined with all the Muslim communities of Europe, together with the Organization of European Rabbis, for working for a Muslim-Jewish cooperation. He is going in his father's footsteps. His father was a great, great man, and he has taken over the leadership from his father, has learned from his father, and is now taken upon himself the leadership of tolerance and coexistence and creating civilization. We're very honored that you came from Italy to be with us today. Thank you. And I welcome here finally Rabbi Tamar Elad Appelbaum, who is the co-founder of the Bet Midrash for Israeli Rabbis. She is the founder of Kehilat Tzion in Yerushalayim. Her work is known for all the people here in Yerushalayim. She's the closest you can come to a woman who is a Hasidic Rebbe, and she has a big audience of Hasidim, male and female, who follow her spiritual and ethical guidance. What nobody knows, it's not in her CV, is that she also had a political career for 24 hours. It's a very short political career. 24 hours. She was a candidate to be a member of Knesset for a very good party, which I can recommend. And then she found out that she wanted to pursue the rabbinate and all the good things that she's doing in bringing spirituality and ethics and morals into public life here, which includes also reaching out to the other religious traditions. And we're honored to have you, Rabbi Tamar, on our panel this morning. So, with no further introductions, I want to present to you, to start off this panel, the Nuncio, who, as I told you, is very new here. He is representing the Holy See as the ambassador. He has a long career of diplomacy and theology behind him. He was ordained priest in 1978, incardinated in Bergamo, and has been in different positions as ambassador of the Holy See. He is representing also the Palestinian territories and Cyprus. So he has a very big kingdom under him, and we are very, very much looking forward to hearing the Nuncio Leopoldo Girelli. Welcome to open this panel this morning. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Michael Melchior, for introducing me to the audience. Panelists here present, ladies and gentlemen, Shalom Alakim. I'm grateful for the honor to address the plenary session on the struggle against anti-Semitism in the Christian tradition. 58 years ago, on June 13, 1960, the French Jewish historian Jules Isaac, had a short private audience in the Vatican with Pope John XXIII, an audience that would prove to be a theological and historical turning point. During that encounter, Isaac presented the Pope with a dossier of materials based on Isaac's extensive wartime research into the roots of Christian anti-Semitism, in the hopes that this documentation could help to spur the upcoming Second Vatican Council and initiate a substantial change in Catholic attitudes towards Jews and Judaism. Isaac asked the Pope to help transform a teaching of contempt into a teaching of respect. The conversation proved to be a catalyst leading to the Vatican document on the Church's attitudes towards non-Christian religions, called Nostra Aetate, which is widely regarded today as a key building block in the reorienting of contemporary Christian attitudes towards Jews. The document, published in 1965, consecrated its longest paragraph to the Jewish people, but did not ignore the dialogue with Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and the other world religions. Since then, the Catholic Church has been engaged in the challenging journey of transforming negative images into positive ones, reinterpreting texts that were used to legitimate the teaching of contempt and finding new texts that can promote a teaching of respect. Thanks to this journey, Pope Francis was adamant in proclaiming at his first official meeting with a Jewish delegation as Pope on June 24, 2013, a Christian cannot be anti-Semitic. The Church has invested and continues to invest much energy and resources in the dialogue with Jews and Judaism. This is done not only through images that portray respect. The successive popes and Catholic leaders regularly meeting rabbis and Jewish leaders. The popes visiting synagogues and standing in a reverential silence before the Western Wall. The popes going to Auschwitz and Yad Vashem. The language of the Church is also insistent on formulating this respect for Jews and Judaism, insisting that Jesus is a Jew, that Christians share with Jews a vast heritage, and that the Jews' religious practice and spirituality can inform Christian devotion. Without obscuring where Jews and Christians differ on important issues, the Church stands vigilant that Christians never be tempted to adopt attitudes of contempt towards those now seen as brothers and sisters. This important revolution in image and discourse with regard to the Jewish people is paradigmatic for the Church's attitude to all those with whom Christians share a common planet. Indeed, an important issue on our shared agenda is fighting all forms of anti-Semitism and all other kinds of racism. If we are to seriously engage in Tikkun Olam, repairing our broken world, we must do so together, building on the values we share and ever broadening the coalition of builders. I'd like to conclude with the words of Pope Francis, and I quote, "We need urgently to educate young generations to become actively involved in the struggle against hatred and discrimination, but also in the overcoming of conflicting positions in the past, and never to grow tired of seeking the other. Indeed, to prepare a truly human future, rejecting evil is not enough. We need to build the common good together." Thank you for your attention.
Thank you ever so much for your important words. And I think, as we also use for our model here in building new relationships here in the Holy Land, where the problems are not so much with the church, but between Jews and Muslims, we often say that if we could change our relationship together between Jews and Christians, and first and foremost with the Catholic Church, as it was done and as you described so clearly from the beginning of the change and how it's being performed also throughout the time, then there's no reason why we cannot change our relationship with Islam, where we do not have that kind of history behind us, which we have had with the church throughout so many years. So it is an inspiration that you have given us, and a push that we can further develop, because there is still hatred between our religions, and there are still Christians who are anti-Semites, and we need to further install in young generations the important words which you have shared with us this morning. And I give the floor to our great teacher, Rabbi Irving Greenberg.
Thank you very much. Every religion that is centuries or millennia old has elements of domination, of teachings of violence for others, and texts of terror, texts that justify hatred and or violence vis-a-vis non-believers or members of other faiths. These norms were widely accepted in pre-modern culture, and Jewish religion has these elements as well. In terms of anti-Semitism, the situation was compounded for millennia in that the two main religions that hosted Jews, that is Christianity and Islam, grew directly out of Judaism or were deeply shaped by its religious conceptions. And to justify their breakaway or their claim to supersede Judaism, they resorted to negative, hateful portrayals of Jewish religion, explaining ongoing Judaism as the outgrowth of Jewish perfidy, evil character, and failure to listen to God's further revelation. And important Christian and Muslim figures justified violent and hateful policies toward Jews. But each of our religions, all three, have texts of love and blessing and of God reaching out universally to humanity. The real issue is which texts, which attitudes and values will be stressed and taught in actual practice in our contemporary civilization. In Judaism and Western Christianity, the process of modernization won out, and the hatred and the violence sources were made secondary. Although to this day there are Orthodox Jews who maintain these norms of exclusivity, hatred, and some even violence, but they have been marginalized by the wielders of power. And the truth is that both our religions owe a debt of gratitude to modern culture and to its secularizers who separated church and state, who pushed religious hatred and violence to being beyond the pale. Unfortunately for Islam, its modernizing process was mostly aborted, leaving much military and political power at the disposal of people who use hatred and violence in its name, and their political power to preach hatred and violence in its name. Furthermore, the birth of Israel and its growth, which has frustrated the Arabs and led to widespread use of Islamic motifs to delegitimate Israel or to circulate outright anti-Semitism. Then there was the Holocaust in Europe. The after effects of this catastrophic mass murder, guilt, shame, horror, has led to a near miraculous repentance on the part of Western Christianity, and especially the Catholic Church, as we heard this morning. In addition to repudiating anti-Semitism, Christians developed a wide-ranging dialogue with Jews, so they were seen as human, and Judaism was studied as a positive religious resource. This process is not perfect nor complete. There's been some backsliding in the liberal churches, Protestant particularly, in the form of anti-Zionism, which is a form of masked anti-Semitism. Still, this Christian repentance is one of the great religious transformations of all time. And I mention it because it gives us a role model and hope that Judaism can confront its own demons and that Islam can overcome the widely disseminated anti-Semitism in its universe. By contrast, in response to the Shoah, Islamic religious leaders mostly dismissed the Holocaust as a European problem or denied it. Paradoxically, the evasion of guilt and lack of willingness to learn from the Holocaust has led to a continuation of the worst inherited elements and made the Islamic cultural world the greatest consumer and disseminator of anti-Semitism. So I offer two proposals for combating anti-Semitism and hatred in all our faith communities, and a third teaching as well. The first is to reach out and support the modernizers and the dissenters in all three religions, but in particular in Islam. And as Natan Sharansky has written in his book on democracy, the West and we as Jews have not given the support to the dissenters despite the oppression and pressure against them. They have moved to repudiate anti-Semitism and violence against other believers, including Muslims. And of course, a similar process needs to be supported and encouraged within the most traditional elements of Orthodox Judaism, many of whose leaders, while they do not resort to violence, still cling to the claim that their divine truth is their monopoly, which may be imposed on others, and that their practices may be applied by coercion to the detriment of other religions. Of course, at the very same time, we need to be vigilant against anti-Muslim phenomena and against those who seek to extort or exploit the behavior of extremists to demonize all Muslims or Islam itself. The second major step, I believe, is to encourage Holocaust education and exploration in all our faith communities and countries. Small steps have been taken in this direction within Islamic communities in recent times, but the initiators have faced opposition and pushback. Holocaust education is not a magic shield, but reflection and willingness to learn the lessons has led to important internal self-correction, rejection of stereotypes, and cooperative efforts in solidarity and mutual respect. My other main suggestion, or teaching if you will, is that we make a massive effort to communicate the centrality of pluralism in contemporary religion and dialogue. We must teach this as an alternative to absolutism, for in most of the world, including in the West and including among liberals, the judgment as to commitment and serious level of religion is still measured by claims of exclusivity, by denial of legitimacy to the alternatives, by rejection of reason and rational critique. And often when people break with this absolutism, they turn to relativism, i.e. saying that no religion should be taken too seriously and that all religions are equally true or equally false. Unfortunately, these views have been unable, those who hold these views have been unable to match the commitment or the dedication of religious absolutists, and have been weak in resisting extremist religious behaviors. So we need to teach pluralism as an affirmation far beyond tolerance. Tolerance is an initial secular and liberal concession, but pluralism represents a deep commitment to one's own faith, upholding the authority of one's own tradition, but acknowledging that the infinite God has reached out and has gone beyond our own tradition and community to engage in relationship with other faith communities and people. Pluralism involves the recognition and the knowledge of the limits of my own understanding and my own tradition, even though I believe that my religion is revealed or divinely inspired. Pluralism involves recognizing the need for help from every other faith community to achieve tikkun olam, the repair of this world, which all our faiths seek, but no one of which is strong enough or able enough to achieve it on its own. Now, this teaching of pluralism must be combined with a comprehensive dialogue between our faith communities, including the religious authorities, such has been pursued by the chair of our panel, Rabbi Michael Melchior, in the dialogue of religious leaders of the Mediterranean basin. While such established leaders may not be as pluralist and willing to go as far as the dissenters, and in many cases reluctant or unwilling to revise internal values and attitudes, they do develop a sense of humanity of the other, and they have come to articulate the overriding values of peace, nonviolence, and mutual respect, which are essential if we're to bring religion back to the moral center of our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. I knew that you would teach us what has been your life's teaching about pluralism in every way and sense, and it comes from the experience also, and what we can learn from what happened in the biggest crime of human history of the Holocaust, and what you have learned from this. And you did not disappoint us in what you taught us this morning. Thank you so much. And we go back to Italy and to Imam Yahya Pallavicini. Please share us with your wisdom.
Good morning, shalom to all. Let me first of all once again thank Rabbi Melchior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel for this second invitation. I hope I won't disappoint you this time, but it's, let me sincerely say what a blessing it is to me, for me and for my wife, once again here in Jerusalem, once again here at the Forum Against Antisemitism, and among friends, among brothers and sisters. I know this is in somehow a teaching from the rabbinical schools to state and to stress the blessing of being or sharing with brothers and sisters. But this is exactly, if I may say, probably the end of my contribution. When one forgets this blessing, then it's easy to start a very narrow-minded, misleading process that eventually leads each one to hate, and then eventually to violence, and then eventually to a very silly reason to have a justification for violence and for hatred. So the starting point for me is really to recognize and to respect and to be very outspoken on the truth of this blessing to be among friends and brothers and sisters. Now, of course, this will probably say, well then, it can be very easy. We could say interreligious dialogue is good and anti-Semitism is bad, which is true. Interreligious dialogue helps each citizen, each believer to strengthen his faith, to have a deeper knowledge of his identity, and to inspire his actions together with other citizens, believers of his own community and of other communities in different fields. And on the other side, anti-Semitism is really something which is really negative. It's an evil way of thinking and of acting. So there is no much to say. But what I will not say is that I don't think we need any more statements or theological debates or peace and love events. They could be nice. We need, from time to time, some peace of life and love, artistic emotions, some theological debates. Yes, we need to go to the roots of our deep doctrine to see the richness of the spiritual teachings. We need also to make juridical, institutional declarations, to be outspoken in condemning any kind of hatred and violence. But this is not enough. And so my contribution this year to the forum would be to try to stress very briefly at least 4 guidelines, 4 bullet points, which are very easy for all of us, I think. One would be stop exclusivism of truth, exactly as it was mentioned before. This does not mean that each one has to have go for relativism. No, each one has to be convinced deeply in the truth of his own belief and of his own identity and of his own community and his own doctrine and vision for life. But what is negative is to deny that there is a common truth also for every other human being, believer of one's own family and community and of other communities of different parts of the world. So the exclusivism of truth is one of the negative situations we have to try to avoid, because this is exactly the misleading interpretation that goes to an apologetic narrative, where one pretends to be the only exclusive depositary of truth, and all the others are mistaken. And this is a very childly narrative that increases the conflict between who believes to have the only knowledge and management of truth and all the others that need to be with violence or through hatred convinced or converted to the only exclusive truth. The other one is stop ignorance. Because behind hatred and behind violence, there is a great ignorance. There is a great ignorance of one's own identity, tradition, richness, and of the other's identity, tradition, and richness. Just think, if a Muslim kills someone else, how far does he know what is the true root of his own self, of his own identity, of his own education, of his own tradition, of his own spiritual teachings? And how far does he know what is the tradition and the identity and the teaching of his so-called enemy? He has no knowledge of his own roots, of his own identity, of his own religious teaching, and of any other religious teaching, identity, and root of his so-called enemy. So there is a need to know differences within theologies, within religions, within cultures, within nationalities, within anthropological and sociological behaviors and experiences, and to respect, if I may say, not to tolerate, to respect these added values of this pluralism as a part of a rich and important society and environment. So there is indeed the need to stop this ignorance of oneself, once again linking ignorance with exclusivism. So I am the only depository of truth. I have an apologetic identity where only my vision of the world is the only best vision of the world, and so the other one has no vision of the world. I ignore him, and I have to either convince him to follow my vision, or to hate him, or to disrespect him, or to kill him. And the other one is stop hypocrisy. This is quite a delicate issue, if I may say, because as far as I was taught by my noble master and father, there is a lot of falsehood within psychological ways, even among religious believers and leaders, to pretend not to implement a consistent interpretation of traditional and religious and spiritual teachings in a brotherly relation of cooperation. So there is every time we find an excuse not to be brothers, not to be consistent with the blessing and with the challenge of sharing a cooperation in all fields and in different ways: interreligious, intercultural, international, intra-religious, intracultural, in different fields of society. Could be health, could be work, could be culture, could be trade. We are pretending to find reasons to have a very close, narrow-minded mentality, and to pretend to have a reason to be on a different level or standard regarding to the other. And in some way giving the opportunity to have a hate for the other and a double standard for the other, and creating this otherness as the enemy. So through my hypocrisy, I am somehow, instead of facing the evil in my hypocrisy, I am trying to create the enemy, because he is the reason for my prejudice, for my misunderstanding. And this is in somehow giving a psychological reason to eventually create any kind of enemy that could be the Semite, that could be the Jew, the Muslim, the poor, the migrant, as we see in Europe. Now it's any kind of category. So this is due to hypocrisy. It's really unfortunate. And then at the end it would be, of course, the stop violence, stop any reason for violence. We can disagree. We can see things differently. We can be critical of one or the other. we can not understand the other. Sometimes it happens for me to have disagreements with my wife. But this does not lead me to hate. This should not lead, I mean, even within Italy or Europe, you have different cultures, and sometimes apologetic national identities would go once against the other. So Italians against French, Germans against the British. But this is a childish hypocrisy. This is a way to be apologetic and to deny the truth of an identity of the other. And so this eventually leads to the legitimacy of violence, which is nonsense. And so my last points would be, so how can we stop violence? How can we stop hatred? How can we stop exclusivism? How can we stop ignorance? How can we stop hypocrisy? As religious actors, we can find at least one core field, which is education and training. We have to increase education in secular environments, in schools for new generations, and it has to be interreligious education. It has to show the misleading interpretations of each of our communities through histories, the conflicts that we had, but it also has to show that within the conflicts, through centuries, there were also reasons and best practice examples of cooperations, respect, sharing, and brotherhood. Within the conflict situation, within the crisis, in all regions and in all centuries. And so this is part of the knowledge that one has to manage conflicts, crisis, but also best practice and cooperation and respect. And this is what it is needed through an interreligious educational approach. And the second one is juridical and political interinstitutional engagement. Religious actors and leaders need to find the way to implement their theological and spiritual background and education in contemporary social challenges, inspiring and helping themselves to advise political leaders to have a more open-minded vision of their responsibilities and to avoid any kind of narrow-minded populism or hypocritical or apologetic narrative that eventually leads to a social conflict. And finally, of course, it's a question of to try to involve social media and the information. We need to involve, for the new generations and for society, a better knowledge of the truth of hate, of the truth of conflict, of the truth of hypocrisy, but also of the truth of how the religious leaders and believers of all centuries have in somehow assured an added value for these values of life in every place and in every time. And this is one of the responsibilities we need to engage, and probably is one of the reasons why I'm so glad to be back here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very inspirational, and at a certain stage I thought that you had got hold of my manuscript and was reading from it for what I was going to say. So I enjoyed every word of it. Thank you. And now we will listen to Rabbi Tamar, who, when you hear her, you will understand why we need very many more female leaders in combating anti-Semitism and hatred in this world.
Shalom, salam alaikum. I speak before you today as the sister of Nadav Elad, my brother, who was killed here in Israel because of hate. I speak as the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor who was saved because of a priest, a Jesuit priest who refused to hate. I speak as the human being who had to then choose between the two, hate or the refusal to hate. And I speak as your sister in our shared history of mutual failure of our religions, despite many incredible progresses that we have done, and especially our Christian brothers, in combating hate at that very junction, which so many human beings still encounter every day in every place today. Because more than any other spiritual malady, the malady of hate, segregation and seclusion leading to hate, the idolatry of my own image as the image of the God that I know, is the spiritual climate in which most of us still live in today. And this malady will not be cured but by leaders of faith, but by religions curing together from our addiction to the monopoly on the image of God. But, as Heschel taught us, by one joint humility, one joint loyalty, one joint accountability to our one God, in a labor of actual action and actual deeds. Action, because all of us inherited languages and sacred texts of tolerance. We each know where to find them, those ancient treasures within our traditions, which maintain and command the imperative of tolerance. They are like trails of lighted pedal stones, dreaming for us to finally take that path. In Jewish tradition, Torah opens with the story of Adam as the one father of all nations, all of us. Jewish prophets dream of one prayer house for all nations, all of us. All Jewish prayers end with the one blessing of peace, shalom. And within Jewish law, one can find legalities that explicitly command tolerance towards people of other faiths. And yet, in the critical crossroads of conflict between our religions, we do not necessarily choose that path. Most often, we do not choose that path. And more than once, we prefer to follow those other voices in our traditions, which exist, diverting us from tolerance for the sake of our survival. Humanity, despite the language of tolerance within every religion, does not necessarily choose tolerance, and all of that is for the sake of that survival. Anti-Defamation League reports that anti-Semitism incidents in America are up in 57, almost 60% in America, together with the rise of hate crimes against Muslims. And here in Israel too, all of us see and witness and know the increase in hate crimes. It's well documented in all religions. Faith is the refusal to accept the world as it looks like today, and the refusal to give up on the world. It is a spiritual, metaphysical training system, training generations of human beings to rebel against our own natural notion of survival, and to deliberately search for a set of values that makes us worthy of that survival. It is a continent of belief that beyond this reality awaits a world of shared kindness. It is the sacred, stubborn work of a spiritual avant-garde, refusing to accept the paradigm that our life is a verdict, that we were sentenced to live like that, each one for himself, each nation for herself, fighting each other, because life then becomes a terrifying jungle with no place for gentleness and partnership and friendship and trust. And we have then only one mission: to survive on the expense of the other. Faith wishes for humanity a future in which many forms of life, all forms of culture, tradition, life, give each other permission to exist, each vouching for the other, teaching us that faith in the infinite cannot be translated to concept of seclusion. Rather, faith in the infinite cannot but speak of a future and of human consciousness that could hold within it more and more of the voices of the infinite. Only that is the future in the world of faith. But individualism and materialism have pushed aside the metaphysical and the language of faith. Humans in the Western world slowly drift away from it. It expedited the individual mode of survival among millions in the Western world. It expedited the national mode of survival of nations too, as a result. And in a world which is so severely instrumental, language itself as a revelation of the divine to human beings, language itself drowns in the mundane functionality. And so too, often, the language of tolerance within traditions, our religions, will be the path less chosen by human beings in our own communities. Therefore, in the climate in which we live, language will not be enough, and not theology either. In a concrete world, not language, but concrete behavior is what we need to cultivate, attuning our communities in every prayer, ceremony, gathering, meeting, and political dilemma, from the most little deeds to the big public ones, to train ourselves through behavior to fulfill God's call for tolerance. I speak before you today as a rabbi who chose with my community here in Jerusalem, a community called Tzion, a community standing in a city on the crossroad which we all know too well, between hate and the refusal to hate, between alienation and trust, to intentionally change our behavior. Here are some examples of what we do in our community called Tzion, together with our Christian and Muslim partners. Some of them sit here with us today. It is now our custom to open our morning prayers with our accountability to our fellow humans, as Rabbi Isaac Luria Ashkenazi the Ari instituted in the 16th century, and to commit that we will love all humans, and to end our prayers with the words of the prophet Micah, let all the people walk each one in the name of its God forever, and we shall walk in the path of our God. It is now our custom in our community to commence every new Jewish year, of course in traditional Jewish prayer, but to end our prayers with blessings by our partners. We will not start a new Jewish year without their blessing and without their presence. We will not begin our year without them. And they likewise. It is now our custom to invite hundreds of people to the public sphere of Jerusalem to pray for this holy city in all traditions and in all languages, through all religions, together with our partners, our leaders of all faiths. It is now our custom, alongside traditional Jewish study, to make fixed times with our partners, studying each other's traditions. It is now our custom to stand publicly together against each and every hate crime. It is now our custom to learn Arabic, just as we learn Jewish law. It is now our custom to speak of peace and be involved in all peace initiatives that we possibly can. All that is the Jewish language of tolerance, which we all knew, yet we did not exercise it regularly ever before. We do today, so do our children, as Jews via Jewish tradition, not weakening our identity as Jews, but strengthening it, exercising so that in times of weakness, we remember who we wanted to be, who we were supposed to be, and what we trained ourselves to choose in such a moment. In this honorable gathering, I want to say that teachers of faith and their communities on the ground should now be the grassroots combatants against anti-Semitism and against any form of hate through our behavior, actions, and deeds. I would like to conclude with the words of Martin Buber. As far as I know, these were his last words, written in Hebrew here in this city in 1965. These words echo within me every day, but they echo especially today here. And he says this: every religion is a house, a homeland for each one of us who can finally yearn to God. But every religion is also an exile that we were all exiled to. Here we are more substantive than anywhere else, differing to other groups of people, building our unique interaction with God. Those religions who acknowledge that this is our situation must actively greet each other. They must create ties between themselves, and those religions must hear with all their might and sincerity what God demands of us right now, in this moment in history. And in light of this, they must solve together in action the problems they face and become partners in shared aspiration for a world that has not yet been redeemed. Toda.
Thank you for your powerful statement. And I shall want to conclude this panel with also sharing with you some thoughts. Since we started, which I had the honor to do, the first global forum, we had kind of informally before Durban. And the world was looking different. It was before September 11th. And there were still people who thought that we were going towards messianic times, good times. Everybody would recognize supremacy of democracy, human dignity, human rights, individual rights, liberties. And things seem to be going astray. And often with religion at the forefront of where things been seemingly going astray. And therefore, it's important, maybe the most important of the panels also here, is how do we go into the depths of religion, as my co-panelists have done, to put religion, our different religion, in the forefront of creating civilization. But I want to tell you that it's also important not to isolate the issue of anti-Semitism. True, anti-Semitism is the oldest, the most stubborn of all forms of hatred in our world, which has brought the most devastating results, catastrophic results to humankind. But even then, when we isolate the combating of anti-Semitism from all kinds of xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, all phobias, then we are not serving the cause of combating anti-Semitism. Not only that, but we cannot only battle the hatreds, cannot only battle even the anti-Semitic acts or even acts of terrorism. What we need to do is to look at the broader picture. What kind of society do we want? What kind of civilization do we want? And I believe that if we build together, Christians, Muslims, Jews, together, an inspiration of words which were said here, from the depth of our traditions, including also people who do not believe. If we can build civilization together, instead of what we're doing now, which is utilizing the fear and the hatred which exists, to building walls against each other, populism, extreme nationalism, terrorism. If we can show models, then we have a civilization. And then the anti-Semites will be isolated. That's the best way to combat anti-Semitism and hatreds and terrorism. When the same leaders, as part of our partnership here, I can't talk about it now, it's too broad, who have written the fatwas which justify terrorism and suicide bombings, when they're now writing fatwas, say there is another way of religious peace, then a young, confused 17, 18-year-olds who maybe thought that he would become a shaheed with no hope in his life, he could become a shaheed. When he sees the big authorities, when he opens the social network, who say, no, you're not becoming a shaheed, you'll go to hell. And that has much more effect than our condemning anti-Semitism. It comes from within the faith tradition. I believe that we can build and create models, but we don't know about each other. We're isolated from each other. We live here in the holy city of Jerusalem, this small shtetl here. We have close to 1 million people living here. 40% of them are Arab Muslim Palestinians. Do we know each other? Do we come together? Do we know what hurts each other? Do we know each other's holidays? No, not at all. We know more and more in our world. There's more and more knowledge out there. But our neighbors, we do not know. And therefore we fear. I want to bring to you and conclude with this a model which maybe can be an idea for many of you. There's a community in Sweden which has had a lot of problems, also anti-Semitism. It's a small community in southern Sweden, a town called Malmö. Some of you have heard about it because there have been stories also in the New York Times about how terrible it is in Malmö. Malmö is a city of some hundreds of thousands of people, very close to Copenhagen. My family was saved there after being during the Second World War, after being hidden by a friend, a priest, who took the family in until they could be saved with fishermen boats over to Malmö. The city of Malmö has the highest percentage per capita of refugees from the recent years. And there have been all kinds of incidents, and the Jewish community was falling apart. They came to me and asked, can you help us with reviving the Jewish community? And also doing something with the relations we have with the different communities in our city. We created together a program called Amanah. Amanah is both in Hebrew and Arabic. Trust, belief. We brought a young rabbi from Tkoa in Israel, and well, we'll discuss that. But and student of the late Rav Menachem Fruman, a believer in religious peace, 5 small children. He went as a rabbi, an Imam from Lebanon. This rabbi looks as the last of the hilltop youth, long peyot, and his kids are in classes with 70–80% Muslim children, look the same. And this Imam from Lebanon, Imam Salukhadin, is a very hardline, conservative Imam. Took a half-hour before they became best friends. They started projects together, working together. And then came the declaration of President Trump about Jerusalem. And there were riots in Sweden because of this. In Göteborg, in Malmö, there were firebombs against the synagogue. There was a demonstration of a couple of hundreds of young people, mostly Muslim youth, calling death over the Jews. The cemetery was desecrated. There was a lot of fear in the air. Everybody condemned it. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, everybody condemned. The usual reaction. But there was no outlet before. But suddenly there was Amanah. And the next day, the leaders of the demonstration came with big flower arrangements to the Jewish community, to Rabbi Moshe David HaKohen and the Imam, Saluchadin, who were studying together with students, said, we want to bring flowers, we want to apologize, we want to repent. What can we do? The next day, it was Hanukkah. They brought the 35 leaders of all the Islamic communities of Malmö who don't necessarily talk to each other. They're actually very much like the Jews. And they all came together to the Jewish community for the candle lighting. They all apologized. Said, we want to work together on these issues, including the elephant in the room, talking about the conflict here, but talking about maybe we can support the religious peace. Evolving together with the Jewish community there. Well, many of them had been very skeptical to this thing. Very much, lots of them, very anti-Islam. They were suddenly seeing something was happening. The next day, which was for me the most important of this, some of the young people, most important, who had been shouting just a few days before, death over the Jews, they came and said, can we meet with the young Jews of the community and start dialogue groups together? We want to meet, we want to talk together, we want to understand, we want to engage. There was an outlet which hadn't been before, and which some of us would have said, but you can't talk to this, because if you talk to this and engage with this, then you're relating to the wrong people. No! There was an outlet. Rabbi Moshe David, he said, you know, maybe our religions talk about exclusivity in the next world. Some will be in heaven, some will be in hell. We don't need to make hell here in this world. My friends, we need to build civilization here in this world. Don't need to build hatred. A lot is dependent, the world is dependent on what kind of message we come in this world, how we build together. This is the way forward. This is the hope we can give the young generations. This is what we can teach them. This is the essence of all my former speakers here, what they've talked about. This is the education. When we do it together, then we can bring trust also to the young generations here, in Palestine, in the Middle East, in Europe, in Africa, in America, all over the world. Thank you very much. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much.
There's a woman here on the second row.
I have a microphone, so can I just ask the first question? Rabbi Melchior, it's Aryeh Green. You can't see me, but you know me, so that should give some credence.
Okay. Well, you have already a microphone, so...
Thank you, and I apologize. I'll be brief. This has been an excellent and inspiring discussion of faith. but there's something missing here because we've discussed our shared cultural traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. But we're about to celebrate Pesach, Passover, in the Jewish tradition, which is really the celebration of our emergence as a people, the nation of Israel emerging as a people. And the delegitimization, which Natan Sharansky mentioned yesterday, is one of the greatest sources of anti-Semitism in today's world. And from a religious basis, we'll have a session in another hour or so about Jerusalem, UNESCO, Mahmoud Abbas, the Islamic Conference, the Vatican, the Anglican Church, and others denying the connection between the Jewish people, between the people of Israel and the land of Israel, and therefore the legitimacy of the founding of Israel. I would like to ask Imam Pallavicini and the representative of the Vatican in particular, when are we going to hear? It's one thing that we Jews have to reassert the legitimacy of Israel. We know that. That's our challenge. When are we going to hear from the leaders of the Muslim world, the leaders of the Vatican, the Anglican Church, a recognition of the Jewish connection to this land, of the legitimacy of Zionism and its connection to Zion, and a recognition of the legitimacy of Israel and its founding? When we hear that, we might be able to see real interfaith relations and a real possibility of peace in the region. I'd like to hear your response to that.
Well, I just want to say the nuncio, as being very new to this area, has asked, and he was really only yesterday approached to be on this panel, and he's new to the area. He's not going to, but I will just say, I will let the Imam answer you on his behalf. I will just say that I think that the Holy See has both recognized the relationship and the legitimization of the Jewish people and its connection to the land. But I'm not going I can talk for hours about the theological aspects of this. I'm not going to do that now, but this has happened. I had the honor as a cabinet minister to receive John Paul II in the first official visit, which was the recognition and the establishment of the embassy here, and so on. And this has been done both on a diplomatic and a theological level. But I'm not speaking in the name of I can hardly speaking in the name of my wife, and I'm for sure not going to speak in the name of the Catholic Church. Please.
Yes, thank you. Do you hear me? Yes. For the question, of course, I cannot speak for the Vatican, although I live in Rome. But I'll try to speak on behalf of, if I may say, of what is part of my responsibilities as a European Muslim. I might say, to make it easy, that I agree with your point. Institutionally, maybe you have several governments since centuries, since decades, that have a hypocritical attitude towards what you are requesting, legitimacy of Jewish population and citizens and institutions with this land. It is true. But the reason why we are here, or I am here, is that even if there are some narrow-minded politicians of the so-called Muslim world that do not accept or are somehow creating other reasons for delegitimizing this link, there is no reason for hatred and violence and anti-Semitism. This is a very delicate issue, because if you are linking the legitimation of the State of Israel and the dignity of all Jews. 2 years ago I was here, and Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned, because there were attacks on the Jews in Europe, in my place where I live, and he mentioned that all Jews will find freedom and security here in the State of Israel. As a European Muslim, I was next to the Jewish chairman of the Italian Jewish community. I was saying, this is wonderful, but I, as a European citizen, as an institutional advisor, as a Muslim leader, I am trying to work because Jews have to be in peace and security even out of the state of Israel, not only in the state of Israel. And this is the vision and the engagement we can try to offer. So this is and this is part of the Muslim Jewish Leaders Council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Pellak from the Elijah Interfaith Institute, and I want to thank you all for your wonderful words, as well as the terrific things that you all do in your work, in your daily lives. I just want to take issue with the Imam, but I think he took issue with himself as well. I think we do need a lot more of these loving gatherings. True, it's not enough, but not all of us can be theologians and engaged in theological discussions together. What we can all do, and I know Tamar does this, and I'm also involved in praying together in Jerusalem, is that we can pray side by side in our own authentic ways. And I really think we need to think about what ordinary people can do, ordinary people praying side by side, while the religious leaders and the theologians might engage in the more academic study together, not just praying together, but as Tamar said, also working together. So I'd like for the Imam, please, to assert or agree that we do need still these loving, behavioral, if you like, tikkun, that we work and live and pray side by side.
He agrees. Okay. Can we have just questions? Just a question, no statements. Question short. Yes, a question.
May I? I have a question to the nuncio. As a researcher, what would...
No questions, not questions to the nuncio, no. No questions to the nuncio. Yes, please, yes.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Sergio Shimba from Zambia. I'm the leader of opposition. My question is for the two rabbis. We have 1.2 billion Africans. Zambia is the only nation in Africa which is declared as a Christian state constitutionally. It's written in our constitution. My question is, what are you doing practically to reach out to Christians in Africa to deepen their understanding on the Jewish, not just religion, but of course, life and culture, especially when it comes to the matters that concern Jerusalem. We have many ill-informed Christians who believe that the Jerusalem which Jesus Christ was talking about is spiritual and not the current one. We have a situation where Christianity is seeing a culture where everything is spiritualized to the extent that we are becoming ethically relevant and a danger to ourselves. Whenever anything happens in Jerusalem, many Christians don't care that because there is a spiritual Jerusalem. What are you doing to educate Africans? We are not seeing many Jewish organizations in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think it's a good question in that it's probably fair to say that not enough resources have been expended by the Jewish community, by the Jewish people, in reaching out to the Africans, African nations, on many levels. One of them, of course, is religious, but also, I think, on the political question. Of course, you know there's a history here with the State of Israel, which had an extensive network of outreach to the African nations. A lot of those were broken after the Six-Day War and the pressure from Russia and from the Arab countries to break relations. There has now been a revival. So I think, to go in order, I think the African nations need a good deal of political, economic, and social help. I think there are very important initiatives. I don't know if you've seen some of these. It's things like bringing electricity, solar power, and so on to Africa, bringing water. In other words, I'd say it starts with the famous line of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter that your material, your basic needs are my spiritual challenge and responsibility. So I think it really starts there. The second step after that is, I do believe, that there has to be a much more serious Jewish outreach spiritually. I think there's a very small organization. There's a group called Kulanu United States, which in fact works with indigenous African communities, some of which are rediscovering Jewish roots or exploring them and trying to help them. So the answer to your question is there isn't enough, partly because the community, I think, has been provincial and not reached out enough beyond Judaism and Jewry with its religious and political messages. But I think there's greater awareness growing, and I think there'll be more activity of this sort in the coming years.
I want to thank you for what you just said. And I want to say that as you said, we're getting close to Pesach, to Passover, but not only to Passover, to celebrating 70 years to the State of Israel. In the past 70 years, many Jews living here in the State of Israel have been immersed spiritually in their own lives and in the lives of the neighbors next to them. And what you are now doing is standing on the entrance of a state that should never become a bunker and never take care of itself, but take care of the world, and make sure that we as Jews have come to the State of Israel in order to make sure that we create ties of friendship and spiritual knowledge and relationships with you. So I think you just invited all of us to take that responsibility, and thank you.
I want to just conclude, because we unfortunately don't have time for... No, I'm sorry. I'm getting very angry faces, but we can talk after we finish. I want to thank my co-panelists here. We would have liked more time. I want to just conclude also in the spirit of what the co-panelists said. Part of our mission is, and I think it's the mission of the Jewish people of the State of Israel. One of the reasons why Abraham came here was not just to come here in order to survive, but come here to be a blessing and to build a model, Ki Tzion tetzeh Torah, that the Torah should come out from Tzion, from this city, from this country. The Torah is also the Torah of how we can turn this city to be a model of how we can work together, the religions in the front line, for making peace, for having tolerance and respect and listening to each other, which doesn't mean that everybody has to agree. It doesn't mean that we can only deal with Muslims who accept the whole Jewish Zionist narrative, and just as we don't have to accept the narratives of the other side. You don't have to do that in order to come together to work for peace and for tolerance and for building a better civilization. And this is what this is about. It's about how from Tzion we can be a gate to heaven. Or every one of us, religious leaders, older, distinguished leaders, younger leaders, women and men, but also not leaders. Everybody can contribute to this. And the Jewish people out in the world, and non-Jews together, Christians and Muslims together, we can do this together. It can be a slippery slope to hell, and it's so easy to have this place go up in fire. It is so easy, and there are those who know how to do it. But it's also a tremendous, tremendous challenge and possibility now that we are at the verge of celebrating now Pesach. Pesach could so easily not have happened, but in one moment, the chipazon, suddenly it became redemption. And let's hope that we can bring redemption to humankind in a world which so much strives and needs hope and future. Thank you very much.